The New Orleans Saints will be in position to grab a playmaker in the first round of the 2026 NFL Draft, but going offense or defense might be the biggest debate.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, taking a look at the first 2 days of the draft and the biggest questions that face the Saints in each of the first three rounds. In round three, Mickey Loomis has already said that he likes the depth in this year's draft, why a trade back could make sense. Two big-time wide receivers could be available in round two, but the Saints would have to wait on one of them. And in round one, you know you can get a big playmaker, but investing on the offensive side or the defensive side might become one of the hottest conversations of the offseason. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Thanks for helping us get here as we bring you your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. They're now officially in playoff mode every game day throughout the NFL playoffs. FanDuel is giving customers more ways to get in on the action. So visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today to get started. New Orleans Saints are in a good position. Pick number 8 overall with a top 10 selection. And they're going to be able to get a playmaker, an impact player early on in this draft. One of the things that General Manager Mickey Loomis said during his end-of-year press conference alongside Kellen Moore, New Orleans Saints head coach, was that they're not so worried going into the draft about feeling like they have a need at this position or that position. They're looking at players that will impact their team and being able to make a decision based upon that, which puts them in a really, really good position to go best player available. Now, this could open up the conversation for a trade back. We know the New Orleans Saints haven't done that since 2007, and that's going to be a big part of the offseason conversation should the Saints trade back in the first round. But I think if they're going to trade back, they do it later. I understand the idea of being able to maybe build up some more draft capital to help build your team, but there's not going to be a top flight quarterback on the board at number 8 for you to be able to take advantage of a real trade back situation. So instead, I could see the New Orleans Saints sticking and picking at pick number 8 overall, and they're in position to get exactly what it is they're looking for in terms of an impact player. The thing is, they can do it on offense. They can also do it on defense. And so which one is the right direction to go? I don't know if there's really an answer necessarily just yet, but this will certainly be something that we follow over the course of the offseason. Let's take a look at both sides of the football, however. We think about impact players, impact positions, so we're going to kind of lean in a little bit of some of the things that the Saints typically do, but then also atypically do when it comes to the NFL draft. Let's start over on defense. We know the Saints love their defensive linemen in the first round. We've seen it with players who shall not be named. We've also seen it successfully with players like Bryan Bresee and others. Of course, Cam Jordyn was a first rounder years ago. And so for New Orleans, going back to the old, comfort zone a bit, going offensive line or defensive line. Right now we're talking defense. We'll focus on defensive line. Does make a lot of sense for the Saints. A couple of names to watch out for. Texas Tech edge rusher David Bailey, one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, in the NCAA, who could absolutely, there's no question that his skill set translates to the league. 14 and a half sacks in 2025, tied at the top of the nation in that metric. Really incredibly disruptive player as well. High motor, high availability throughout his career, lots of experience throughout his career as well. Doesn't have as many kind of question marks or red flags as we're used to seeing in typical defensive end first round players. David Bailey, a very safe, very effective, and impactful probably prospect at the beginning of this year's draft. Another player to watch out for would be Clemson defensive lineman Peter Woods, another impact player, but this time on the interior. Can rush the passer from the interior, also help your team a ton in terms of the run game. Get another Clemson prospect right next to your very successful Clemson first-round pick in the defensive line, and Bryan Bresee from just a few years ago, who should be ready to get back to the field in terms of offseason programming, practices, camp, all that stuff, despite his injury that shut him down later on in the season. And then, of course, talk about a playmaker. Safety Caleb Downs out of Ohio State, Arvell Reese, the linebacker out of Ohio State, quite a few Ohio State players that could be possible in the first round for New Orleans. But these players, Caleb Downs, Arvell Reese, I don't think Arvell Reese makes it to 8, but also we never really know, right? We say a lot of things like that at this point in the draft, but then when the draft comes in April, enough teams have paralysis by analysis themselves or talk themselves out of things or, get distracted by the tweener conversation, which is very present for Arvell Reese, so we'll see what happens there. But more realistically, safety Caleb Downs could potentially be on the board, giving Brandon Staley another Derwin James-like safety to be able to help to bolster his defense and get the ball back to Tyler Shuck and the New Orleans Saints offense. I don't want to leave edge rusher Ruben Bain off this list either. He also could potentially suffer from a bit of a tweener conversation in the NFL draft. But out of Miami, he would be another player to watch for as an impact player that could potentially land with the Saints in the first round. So defense, lots of really good impact players, defensive line, second level and third level in the secondary. But then hopping over to the offensive side of the football, we also know that the Saints don't mind taking round 1 wide receivers either. We saw that, of course, with Chris Olave years ago, who just had his second team All-Pro season. Incredible job by Chris Olave, a guy that was contemplating retirement just last offseason, now hit career highs in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns, and is now second team All-Pro. He's going to make himself some money once that extension finally comes through, whether it's this offseason or next. But over on the offensive side, you can continue to add to that room. Wide receiver Jordyn Tyson out of Arizona State is a really exciting, physical, big-bodied player that can be that quintessential X receiver in your offense, allowing you to be able to continue to move Chris Olave around. And oh, by the way, you can also move a guy like Jordyn Tyson into the slot too on certain snaps so that you get the bigger body on the inside. There's so much that you could do with a player like that. Has some injury concerns, soft tissue stuff, hamstring, everything. So I could see maybe a little bit concern around that. But honestly, most NFL teams carry the we can fix that when it comes to the draft. I think that's going to be more of a media and fan concern than it's ever going to be a team concern. Similarly, when it comes to wide receiver out of Ohio State, Carnell Tate, again, ex-receiver, big body, physical play style, all that, but can also move around on the offensive side. Probably a little bit less injury concern when it comes to him. But again, another physical ex-receiver presence from Ohio State that you can partner up with the former Buckeye himself in Chris Olave and then give yourself an opportunity. But what if the Saints say, hey, we've got Chris Olave, got Devon Vele, go and grab a wide receiver in free agency, not super worried about wide receiver in the first round, which is a deeper position in this class, then you can go to running back Jeremiyah Love, who absolutely makes sense there as well. So the Saints can find impact players and playmakers on both offense and defense, but prepare for the offensive versus defensive side of the ball conversation to be a big time debate this offseason. Right now, I got to be honest, because of the depth at some of the offensive positions, I'm kind of leaning defense, but I have a hard time passing on Jeremiyah Love if he's there at number 8. We'll see how that changes over the course of the draft cycle. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints can wait on wide receiver, like we just said. And in the second round, there's 2 really good ones. They just might have to wait a little while for one, but that doesn't mean that he wouldn't be worth investing in. Let's jump into that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. Whether you're looking at picking up a new routine or maybe you're brand new to stat projections, Prize Picks is the place to go with pro football playoff action going on, hoops and everything going on as well almost every night. You're going to be able to get in on all of that action over at Prize Picks. Today, it's going to help you stay in control. All you got to do is pick 2 or more players and choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. So you might get a passing yards projection like 251.5 yards. Will it be more or less? Do that on 2 to 6 players. Win some of those, win all of those, and you're walking away a big time winner. And I love the flexibility that Prize Picks gives with things like Flex Play, where you can still get paid even if one of your picks misses. So download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood Prediction Markets. It's not you against the house, it's you participating in a live market. You can buy and sell positions live all game long and use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood Prediction Markets changes the game. It's people moving the action, so when the momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now, I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the US. Download the Robinhood app to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. All right, family, we mentioned how deep the wide receiver class is in the 2026 NFL draft. And because of the depth at that position, the Saints don't necessarily have to swing in the first round for a wideout that could have an impact for them. In fact, there are 2, possibly even 3 wide receivers in the second round that could make a lot of sense for New Orleans. It's just they have to make the decision about whether or not they want somebody that'll be available week 1 or somebody that might be even better, but they'd have to wait a little while for. Let's break it all down as we continue on with today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us and being an everydayer here on the show. Don't forget to check out the Everydayer Club as well, where you can get Locked On Saints uninterrupted by ads. $5 a month or $50 a year if you want to save a little bit on top. You can also check out the All Access program, which will include prospect breakdowns as we discuss some of these prospects. That begins this week. Free agency breakdowns, as well as one-on-one conversations, Zoom calls, Q&As, and much more. You can check that out over at lockedonsaints.supercast.com or click the link in the description. The New Orleans Saints have, in my opinion, 2 top flight wide receiver options in the first round with kind of a 2B or maybe like a 3, like a third option potentially there. But I want to focus on the top 2 wide receiver options first, and I'll fill you in on the third. The top 2 for me are Indiana wide receiver Elijah Sarratt, who just had a great game in the Indiana win this past weekend, coming up with 2 passing touchdowns in that game. Everybody get ready to welcome Fernando Mendoza to the Las Vegas Raiders as soon as he enters the NFL. He's definitely going to be the number 1 overall selection at this point. But their handling of Oregon, where the other top quarterback prospect, Dante Moore, is, and Elijah Sarratt just being out there and being sort of this big physical presence that can run the back of the end zone, but that can also challenge you deep, that can block. That is just, he just plays, I've said this several times since I've been following him, he just plays with the attitude that I love in a wide receiver, of the I'm bigger and better than whoever it is that you dare to put across from me, whatever number it is that you put across me, I'm better than that number. I'm better than that jersey. And I love that attitude, that play style, physical, all of that. Had a great season in 2025. It continues going into the national championship game. What a run for Indiana. But he's one of the 2 top options, I think, at wide receiver when it comes to the second round. So if the Saints were to go for Jeremiyah Love, the running back, or go to the defensive side of the football, as we broke down a second ago, landing on Elijah Sarratt in the second round feels pretty good in terms of a guy that could potentially give you that quintessential X receiver, all that kind of balances out your wide receiver room. But he's not the only option. The other option is Louisville wide receiver Chris Bell, obviously somebody that former Louisville quarterback Tyler Shuck has some familiarity with their one season they spent together in Louisville. But he's coming off of an ACL tear late in the season. Now, that might not be an issue to some teams. Typically, teams with really good wide receiver talent. So if the Saints go into the draft coming out of free agency by adding another wideout, let's say that they love Chris Olave, obviously. They loved what Devon Vele did towards the end of the season. He'll be back to begin the year. And then they add some other wide receiver, maybe not necessarily top flight like Romeo Doubs or Alec Pierce, but maybe they end up with another wideout that could potentially help them out at the position. Then maybe they feel okay knowing that they've got Olave and Vele, knowing too that they would probably have a lot more 2 tight end or 2 running back sets early on in the season and be pretty comfortable with that. They've been very comfortable with that here throughout this year. Could you go with Chris Bell, knowing that you get a good build of a wide receiver that also has great speed, good yards after catch opportunities with him, and top flight downfield threat with him as well. And the Saints, again, were very, very effective downfield. They were also incredibly effective. Tyler Shuck, one of the best passers in the intermediate 10 to 19 yard range downfield as well. So Chris Bell might be somebody that you have to wait for. Think Jamison Williams back a few drafts ago with the Detroit Lions, where they drafted him still in the first round, still within the top 20 or wherever it was, and waited for him to be ready to come back, and it was able to move on with them. And he's been such a big part of their offense, of course, since then. Could you make a similar move for the sake of having Chris Bell on your roster? I don't hate it. I don't dislike it. You just have to know that you're not getting somebody that's going to be on the field for you week one. And as long as you're okay with that and you feel good at the wide receiver spot and you've invested that first round pick in somebody else that brings you a big impact on the field, getting somebody that just this year had 72 receptions, 917 yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns, you'll take every bit of that. You'll take every bit of that because that's the type of player that you could add to this offense, and you'd feel pretty good about that addition. You just would have to be willing to wait. But when there are other options out there that could potentially bring you impact right away, like an Elijah Sarratt, who's coming off of a 16 catch, 802 receiving yards season, and 15 touchdown receptions on the year as well, which, by the way, not only leads the Big Ten Conference, but also leads the FBS as well, or Division One. That's massive for New Orleans as a potential acquisition. So I get the argument either way, and I understand how promising a guy like Chris Bell is. But if Chris Bell and Elijah Sarratt are on the board at the same time, maybe you go with week one impact. But if Elijah Sarratt's already drafted and Chris Bell's there and you really like him, then maybe it makes sense to say, you know what, future investment. And the Saints have done this already, right? They drafted or they traded for Jalen Polk, knowing that he wasn't going to be a part of what they were doing in 2025, waiting to see what he's going to look like in 2026. Do you make a similar situation or a similar decision rather here to where you say, you know what, we're going to draft him, might not be ready until November, December, but have him ready and keep building and bolstering that wide receiver room, knowing that you're going to get a boost later where you might deal with injuries otherwise. The other option is for New Orleans to go with other players that maybe aren't necessarily being talked about as second rounders right now, but might be by the time that the draft actually rolls around. Tennessee's Chris Brazell is obviously a very good example of that. 6'4". He's going to run in like the 4.4 range. So he's tall, he's big, and he's fast. And he's going to be one of those players. Our guys over at Locked On NFL Draft, Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez, we're talking about how this year's wide receiver class is going to be like last year's running back class, to where somebody's going to get a big time contributor in the middle rounds at wide receiver, like you were able to get a big time contributor in the middle rounds at running back in previous years. A guy like Georgia's Zachariah Branch is probably only going to see his stock tick up as he runs a 40 and goes to games and all these other pieces. So I'm very, very intrigued to see what New Orleans does here. But with two wide receiver options, which one do you go for? The guy that you're going to get steady impact with that you can have right away, or the guy that might be absolutely explosive in your offense, but you'll have to wait a little while for after investing in if you took him in the second round? Curious to hear your thoughts. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints love the depth in this year's draft class. That means a trade back could make sense in the middle rounds. We'll break it down here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL wildcard weekend is here, and FanDuel is absolutely in playoff mode, making sure that customers have a new way and every way to get in on all of the action. For instance, right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside of the app. Each and every game day, you'll be able to check out that pack, which is going to be loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to bets that you already like the most. So you're not having to check out new things. You can stick with what you already like and get more juice for the bets that you lean in on. And that includes even bigger payouts while the playoffs are rolling as well. We saw the Chicago Bears come up with the upset win. We watched the Carolina Panthers cover the spread on Saturday. So much more all throughout, not just NFL wildcard weekend, but now moving into the next round as well. So visit FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, and grab your Profit Boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints have already said, General Manager Mickey Loomis, that they like the depth in this year's draft class. And while that might not necessarily impact what it is that they want to do in the first round, outside of not feeling like they need to rush for a specific position, it could be the middle rounds where the team potentially looks at doing something that they haven't done since the 2007 season and trading back. If you go back to the last two times that the Saints traded back, 2006, 2007, those weren't trade backs out of the first round. Those are trade backs in the middle rounds of the draft. And the Saints have a potential, have the ability, and have an opportunity here in the 2026 NFL draft to do exactly that. Trade back in the middle rounds and put themselves in position to A, add another player in this year's draft class, or B, add some more draft picks in a future year like 2027. But also in either of those scenarios, still be in position to pick up a really talented player that could have an impact for them in 2026. So let's take a look at two options, sticking and picking or trading back, and what that talent crop might look like for New Orleans. So if the Saints were to stay where they are, which is hovering around 73 or so in this year's draft, I don't think that's going to be impacted because the compensatory picks don't start until the end of the third round. But you never know. We don't know for sure. The draft order is not officially set, but 73-ish is where we expect New Orleans to be in that first or in that third round. And in that position, they're in a good spot to add talent, both on offense and on defense. Offensively, I think that looking at more tight ends in the draft could make a lot of sense for New Orleans. In the third round has some pretty good options for them in terms of players that are projected to go in that range right now. Tight end out of Ohio State, Max Klare. Tight end out of Baylor, Michael Trigg. Both of those players give you solid pass catchers. Michael Trigg, an absolute pass catching threat, kind of the Harold Fannin Jr. out of, where was he? Was it Boston College? No, it wasn't Boston College. It was the other one, Bowling Green. Out of Bowling Green last year, ended up in Cleveland, had a fantastic rookie season. Part of probably one of the reasons why David Njoku could potentially become available and could be an option for New Orleans. The Saints could also go to Isaiah Likely in free agency if he escapes Baltimore after Baltimore extended Mike Andrews. And so maybe tight end gets off the board by the time that they get here. But if not, good options. Max Klare gives you a little bit more of a blocker than Michael Trigg does. Still a better pass catcher than he is a blocker, but an okay situation for New Orleans because, look, they can help you out in the run game in terms of run blocking, sure, but as pass blockers, they're not going to be asked to do a ton in Kellen Moore's system. Not that they won't be asked to do anything, but we saw it all throughout the 2025 season that tackles, Calvin Banks Jr. and Taliesin Fuanga, were on an island for the majority of their snaps as a rookie in Banks and then, of course, a second-year player in Fuanga. And being on an island means they didn't have double teams from the center or double teams from a tight end or chips from a tight end or chipping from a running back. They were just kind of on their own, which is, I think, a wise practice. Let the guys that are out there to block. Let the guys that are out there to run and catch, run and or catch. And I appreciate that about the way that the Saints offense operated in 2025 because we saw so many examples of that otherwise in previous years that kind of stamped out some potential impact from players that could be having that impact. You think about Juwan Johnson not really being utilized until the second halves of seasons 3 years before Kellen Moore showed up twice by Pete Carmichael and then again by Clint Kubiak. Having those players available to go out there and have an impact for you. You saw the remarkable season that Juwan Johnson had that could have been even better in some cases. And so I think if you add more to this tight end room, it helps the Saints in terms of their wide receiver needs and things like that too, depending upon how they feel they've addressed that position through free agency in the draft up to this third round. It also gives you an opportunity to hang with a little bit more of what's happening in the NFL. Where you are seeing more multiple tight end sets, you are seeing more multiple running back sets. Here's a chance for you to continue to build that with either one of these players, in Max Klare or Michael Trigg. I like both of them. Max Klare a little bit more all around, but like I said, still better as a pass catcher than he is as a blocker. Michael Trigg, an absolute pass catching threat for you at the position out of Baylor. Now, We mentioned Chris Brazell earlier, the wide receiver out of Tennessee. This could be a range that he goes if he doesn't rise up in the draft process or throughout the draft process, especially once he runs his 40 and all those other things. People get really excited about him because he's so big and he's so fast. But Chris Brazell could be an option at this area. And then I would even throw over to the defensive side as well. Miami edge rusher. No, not that one, not Ruben Bain, but his partner in crime in Akeem Mesidor, who was a absolute wrecking machine in some cases over in Miami with the Miami Hurricanes, and an opportunity for you to land a player there. But New Orleans could say, you know what, we like all those players, but there's a lot of players in the 90 to 100 range, which would be the bottom of the third round or the top of the fourth round, that they feel pretty good about. And so because of that, they could trade back, like I said, add another pick in the top 150, top 200, or add another pick in 2027. And by doing so, put themselves in position for another disruptive pass rusher and Penn State edge rusher. Danny Dennis Sutton could be a pretty good option there. Or maybe they want to go back to the offensive line and focus on their offensive interior. Texas A&M has a guard that's going to go in that area of Chase Basantis, who's really talented, really physical, very aggressive, and plays with a violent shriek. Could be a player for them. Could go back to the defensive side, second level, get yourself another linebacker for your post-Demario Davis days. Texas Tech linebacker, Jacob Rodriguez, who's really physical, plays fast, and just plays with a ton of energy. Could be a lot of fun next to Danny Stutzman at some point. Or if he doesn't rise up the board, Zachariah Branch, that wide receiver out of Georgia, who gives you a really, really true run after catch threat. So don't be surprised if all of a sudden trading back becomes an option for the Saints in the middle rounds. All right, time for a little bit of Lanyap, fam. We're going to be diving into this one. This is going to be super easy here because we already know it's all about Chris Olave. We kind of highlighted him earlier on today's show, but I wanted to make sure that I gave it the moment that it deserved in this show. Chris Olave, a guy who just last year was contemplating retirement after having a season marred by concussions, head injuries, things like that, comes back and has a career year. 100 receptions, 1,163 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns, all career highs. 1 touchdown shy of being that 1,010 wideout for the New Orleans Saints. Would have been the first player in would have been the first player in Saints history to do that. Doesn't come up with that, but regardless, career highs all across: targets, receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, all of it, and then caps off an incredible season with a second-team All-Pro nod. Becoming only the third New Orleans Saints wide receiver to receive All-Pro recognition. Michael Thomas did it twice, and then Danny Abramowitz did it way back when, and now Chris Olave as well. And I bet that second-team All-Pro nod, along with those career numbers, are going to massively benefit him when it comes to those contract extension conversations as they continue this offseason or potentially go into next offseason. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, we're going to dive into some of the young talent that the New Orleans Saints have on their roster to now build around. Lots of excitement to be had there. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.